So Luigi has quite an incredible bio. He obtained his PhD in acoustics from the Institute of Hydromechanics at the Ukrainian National Academy of Science in 2004, and a second PhD in computational mathematics from the Institute of Cybernetics at NAS in 2020. Since one PhD was clearly not enough, he had to go and get two. And since 1999, he's been working at the Scientific and Production Enterprise Delta SPE in the area of telecommunications. He has been a member of the IEE and has been teaching Vedic mathematics and other courses in Kiev, the Kiev Krishna Consciousness Academy since 2013. So let's welcome Dvija Govinda.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for your kind words, Tak Prabhu. It's my great pleasure and honor to be with you today, this morning, or anyway, this daytime with our international audience. The title of my talk is a proportionality approach to the relevance of height in the Puranic cosmos. So we know that the Puranic universe is some enigmatic character for majority of people who are interested in cosmology. We have such strange at first sight things like the relatively small size of the universe, the planets which are spaced with the regular intervals, planets and locusts which are placed at regular intervals one to another. So some other mysterious things, and at the same time, we know that in the same Vedic tradition, the so-called Jyotish Shastras, among which we can mention, of course, Surya Siddhanta and Siddhanta Shiromani, they present a view of outside cosmos, which is much more like, much more appropriate for our senses, for our senses, and which is endorsed by the modern science. So the main goal of this investigation is to find connections, find some simple mathematical transformations which can help us to move on from the Puranic parameters of the universe, of Brahmanda, to the universe which is observed by our senses and which is endorsed and supported by the modern science. Especially in this talk, we are focused on the vertical dimension of the universe. We know that according to the Puranic model, the planets and locusts are spaced at regular intervals in the vertical dimension of the universe. And there are, of course, as we know, a lot of approaches which try to explain how we should deal with it. Maybe we should take these distances given by the Puranas as they are, or maybe they have some esoteric distances, or this is space dilation or other values of Yojan and so on. A lot of interpretations exist, and they continue to appear again and again. And during our last presentation in 2019 at BIHS in Janesville, we mentioned some review of these approaches. However, yes, in particular, also during this presentation 2 years ago, we were able to discover some interesting connections between the parameters of the planets with their heights, which are given in the Puranas. Some parameters, eccentricities of the orbits are connected in some very interesting way with the Puranic heights. So, in continuation of that investigation, the goal, as I said, of our present work is to explore mathematical transformations that highlight some possible connections between Puranic and Siddhantic cosmologies, and this may suggest to us that the ancient Puranas indeed contained relevant information about our perceivable universe. So the main problem for all scientists who are encountered with the Brahmanda is a relatively small size. As for modern view, just 500 million yojanas, 500 million yojanas. And at the same time, we know that in the Surya Siddhanta, the size of the universe, the size of Brahmanda is mentioned to be 18 quadrillion yojanas. It's not exactly the size, not diameter, but this is circumference, which we shall discuss further. 18 quadrillion yojanas is also not a very big distance. According to modern science, it's about 5,000 light years, or about 1,500 parsecs. So, and it's in some sense, much less than the modern estimated size for the observable universe, which is estimated today is 93 quadrillion light years. So we will say a few words about this Siddhantic circumference of 18 quadrillion yojanas. The main source for the readers of Srila Prabhupada books of this information is from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 2184, which was several times mentioned, I suppose, yesterday. Krishna said to Brahma, "Your particular universe has a diameter of 4 billion miles. Therefore, it is the smallest of all the universes. Consequently, you have only 4 heads." And Srila Prabhupada tells in the purport, quoting his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura, one of the greatest astrologers of his time, gives information from the Siddhanta Shramani that this universe measures 18 quadrillion multiplied 8 miles. This is circumference of this universe. According to some, this is only half the circumference.
Vijay,
yes.
Sorry to bother. Are you showing a presentation right now? Attempting to?
Yes, definitely.
We always see is your face.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I figured you were trying to show something.
I tried to share. Oh, excuse me.
There we go.
Yes. Just a moment. Thank you very much, Dr. Yes, now you see?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, it's much more, I guess, more pleasant than to see just my face. So, yes, I did not show much before, just, some general pictures. I was mentioning approaches which were discussed during one of our last meetings, and also during the series of meetings of BIHS cosmography group held by Mataji Prishni and Tak Prabhu. So, how can we find explanation for the connection between Puranic size of universe, 500 billion yojanas, and Siddhantic, which is 18 quadrillion yojanas? So I want to say a few words about this circumference, how we find its explanation, circumference of 18 quadrillion yojanas, how we find its explanation in the Surya Siddhanta and Siddhanta Shramani. In fact, there are 3 definitions for this parameter. The first is that it's indeed it's a circumference of Brahmanda, which is supported by verses either from Surya Siddhanta and Siddhanta Shramani Goladhyaya. This is exactly the circumference of Brahmanda. Second definition, which is also mentioned by Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, is that this is circumference of Loka mountain. So it's just a half of the circumference of the universe. Also, it's supported by several verses, both from Ganita Adhyaya and Gola Adhyaya of Siddhanta Shramani. And the third definition is that this value is a total distance, so-called kaksha, the distance that every planet travels around the Earth during the day of Brahma. In other words, during the Kalpa, during 4.3 billion years. So this is supported. This is mentioned in several places, both in Surya Siddhanta and Siddhanta Shiromani. So we know that according to Surya Siddhanta, in geocentric model, the planets travel in epicycles around the Earth, which is supposed as some kind of origin, as a reference point, and we can tell about the average distance which every planet travels during the which every planet travels during the Kalpa, during the day of Brahma. And there is assumption, there is no implicit assumption that these planets travel with a constant speed, with the same average speed. And so we can see from these quite primitive calculations that the total distance which is traveled by every planet during the Kalpa is exactly 18 quadrillion yojanas. So it's interesting consequence of this fact is if indeed every planet travels the same distance during the day of Brahma, that then if there would exist some planet that would make just one rotation around the Earth during the day of Brahma, it would have exactly circumference of 18 quadrillion yojanas. It's not mentioned that this planet exists, it's just a consequence of this principle that all planets travel around the Earth with average with the same average speed, which is not exactly supported by the modern science. It seems to contradict, at least at first glance, to one of the Kepler's laws. So how can we connect the Puranic diameter and Siddhantic diameter? One of the popular propositions in this connection is that if we take into account the coverings of the universe, the coverings of Brahmanda, which, as we know, have a progressively large, with the denominator 10 widths, so the total size of Brahmanda is quite close, up to 7%, to the size of the Siddhantic size of the universe. But this may be some kind of coincidence, because it's not supported by the purport by Srila Prabhupada, which we just read, and we can see that it's not also supported by some considerations given in the books by Sataputta Prabhu. So it could be just a coincidence. And we still need to find how to connect these two values. Yesterday, fortunately, Radha Mohan Prabhu told the essence of this approach, so-called proportionality approach, which was originally proposed by Radha Mohan Prabhu. So we can just take the proportionality. We can calculate the ratio between Siddhantic and Puranic sizes of the universe, and this value equals approximately to 7.4 or 7.5 million. And we can then try to apply at least this proportionality coefficient to the Puranic heights given in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas. So take this ratio of sizes and try to apply it to other Puranic heights. It's very interesting for the practical calculation, for the practical implementation of this approach. We can notice that this coefficient is quite close to the light year in yojanas divided by 100,000. So if we take light year in yojanas and divide it by 100,000, we have almost exactly this proportionality coefficient. And this simplifies This simplifies our application of this principle. So if we have some Puranic height of some planet or some loka, we must divide it by 100,000 and we will obtain this proportionally increased distance, proportionally increased height in light years. So what it means, I will show on a few examples. For example, if we take nakshatras, yes, the level of nakshatras mentioned in the 5th canto, 22nd chapter, we see that their Puranic height is given as 500,000 yojanas, and application of proportionality approach gives us the value of 5 light years. So for possible comparison, we can mention the modern distance to the nearest star, Alpha Centauri, which is 4.3 light years. Also for Saptarishi constellation, which has Puranic heights of 2.6 million yojanas, if we apply this proportionality approach, we obtain the distance of 26.2 light years. One possible comparison is, of course, there are many stars with different distances in the Ursa Major Big Dipper constellation, but one of the stars, one of the famous stars in this constellation, have distance from the Earth as 45.9 light years. So with some maybe up to 1.7, 1.8 ratio, yes, we have approximately, at least we have approximately the same order of distance. Or Dhruvaloka, if you associate Dhruvaloka with the pole star, then we can see that its Puranic height is 3.9 million yojanas, and its counterpart in proportionality increased distance is 39.3 light years. Yes, of course, this is less than the distance, modern distance to pole star, 433 light years. But we have to mention that two former pole stars, which were actual 18,000 years and correspondingly 22,000 years ago, had distances of 49 and 45 light years respectively. So in some sense, it's also comparatively the same, at least the same order of magnitude. Also Brahmaloka, if we see that Brahmaloka Puranic height is 233.9 million yojanas, and its proportionally increased variant corresponds to 2,356 light years. We have no exact analog or counterpart to compare with, but of course we have a purport, famous purport. Srila Prabhupada often said that it would take for the spaceship which travels with the speed of light 400,000 years to reach the Brahmaloka, the topmost planet of this universe. So we can also apply these principles to estimate the heights of Maharloka, Janaloka, and Tapaloka, which are the, as we know, the spheres of saints, ascetics. Particularly Janaloka is a residence of 4 Kumaras and other highly elevated sages. At Tapaloka also the residents are not consumable by fire of devastation during the dissolution of the universe. And we can estimate the proportionality increased heights for these Puranic lokas and other objects. And also in this data are given here in the table. Also in the last column of this table, we have comparison of the obtained heights in light years with the distances to some known astronomical objects. Yes, for example, the proportional increased distance for Maharloka equals about 140 light years, which we compared with the 200 light years distance to one of the super Earths, K2 155d. Also Janaloka with the distance of 342 light years is compared with the Canopus, one of the brightest stars, the second brightest star in the sky, as we see it now. So with the distance 310 light years. And also we found some possible counterparts for Tapaloka and Brahmaloka. Okay, for planetary heights, this, as also Radhamohan Prabhu yesterday mentioned, this did not work well in direct sense, because if we take the planets with the Puranic heights of the planets and proportionally increase the corresponding distances, we obtain values which are higher than those estimated by the modern science. But in some sense, what we found is that these values are comparable with the total distance traveled by each planet during Divi Yuga. So this distance, which equals to about 18 trillion Diogenes, yes, these values are somehow grouped around this average value. So this has some connection with the third definition of the Siddhantic circumference. So we may suggest that other approaches must be applied for the planets. For example, those for which were mentioned in our previous talks. For example, 2 years ago at the conference 2 years ago, where we proposed approaches which build connections between the Puranic heights and the modern parameters of the planets, visible planets of the solar system. Okay, I would also mention the so-called second proportionality approach, as we called it, or maybe inversely proportionality approach. So it's based on time-space dilation. The main motivation for the development of this idea was the famous quote from the Srila Prabhupada's purport in the 3rd canto 11th chapter, that time and space are correlative terms. So to justify the subtitle of this work is time-space dilation, I find also appropriate to mention several quotes by Sadabuddha Prabhu from his book Vedic Cosmography and Astronomy. So he writes, there might be some comparable transformation of space in the region of Satyaloka. Thus, while a yogi traveling to Satyaloka may experience that he is crossing 2 billion miles, from our point of view, he might be covering a much greater distance. We therefore suggest that when the Vedic literature speaks of the distance of 2 billion miles to the shell of the universe, it is referring to the distance as it would be perceived by the demigods, yogis, and rishis, who can actually make this trip. Also, from another place, something unexpected must happen to space as well as time as one approaches the universal shell, for it hardly seems impossible to measure a distance of 2 billion miles in ordinary space. So, what is the main idea of the proposed approach, second proportionality approach, is that we know that different lokas have different distances, as we just mentioned in the Puranas. Also, there is a different lifespan. The duration of life at every loka, at least measured, for example, measured in the earthly years, has quite a different value. For example, if the life duration at Earth level is taken as 100 years, at Chandraloka we have 36,000 years, at Svargaloka for Indra, Manu, and other highly elevated demigods is 300 million earthly years. For Maharloka, it's like a Kalpa, day of Brahma, and Brahma lives 300 and 311 trillion years. So at every particular loca, we have specific duration of life. What is the assumption for this proportionality approach is that the perceived diameter of the universe is inversely proportional to the lifespan, which is measured in earthly years. So the higher, it means just what it means. The higher is a lifespan, duration of life at some particular loca, the less is proportionally less is the perceived diameter of the universe for the inhabitants at this level. So it may be expressed by a simple mathematical formula that the product of lifespan onto the perceived diameter of the universe is some constant. So we must find this constant value, and for this we have to find some reference point. We consider two variants for the reference point. The first one is for Brahmaloka and the second is for Maharloka, which like some kind of a border between the regions of highly elevated sages and other beings, living entities. So if you suppose that the size of a universe of 500 million yojanas refers to the inhabitants of Brahmaloka or Satyaloka, then we can in this way estimate this constant value C, which is found to be 1.5 yojanas multiplied years. So, and we can then use this constant to estimate the perceived size of the universe at other locus, at other cosmic levels. The data are given in this table. So for different locus, Brahmaloka, Maharloka, Svarga, Chandraloka, and earthly level, we have in the first column lifespan, and in the second, in the second column we have lifespan, and perceived radius of the universe. In accordance with this inverse proportionality approach, we have the radius of the universe, which is perceived by the inhabitants, by the residents of a particular loca. So we have this value, and in the last column we also give how this level, how the universe is perceived at a particular loca is compared to our distance to some cosmic object. For example, for Maharloka, the perceived radius of the universe would be 24 light years, which is comparison this is the same as Fomalhaut, one of the brightest stars in the sky would be for us, for the earthly residents, for the residents of the earthly level. Or for Chandraloka, the perceived size of the universe would be about 2.9 million light years, which is comparable for our distance at the earthly level to the Andromeda galaxy. So, just to mention the connection with the synchantic size of the universe, we can see that a lifespan, we can estimate in accordance to this approach, we can estimate the lifespan which corresponds to the circumference of the universe of 18 quadrillion yojanas. So, how long is the lifespan of the living entities who experience the universe of this size? And it's found to be 45.8 million years, which is comparable to the lifespan of demigods like Indra and Manu. Also, the second variant, which is considered for this second proportionality approach, is to take Maharloka as a reference point. So if we suppose that the size of the universe of 500 million yojanas corresponds to Maharloka, with a lifespan of 1 kalpa, then we can accordingly estimate this constant C, and then correspondingly find the radius of the universe given in the third column for different locus. So how the size of the universe would be perceived at different locus. We can see that, for example, at earthly level, it would be 14.6 thousand light years, which is approximately of the same order of magnitude as the size of the Milky Way. And for example, for the inhabitants of Chandraloka, it's 41 light year, which is comparable with our earthly distance to the Delta Capricorn star. And of course, at Maharloka, it would be this like the size of the solar system for us. And for Brahmaloka, it's would be quite a small value, 6 multiplied 10 to minus 9th degree, which is compared for us with the outer edge of the Van Allen radiation belt. Returning to the Siddhantic size of the universe, we can say in this second variant of inverse proportionality approach that the lifespan corresponding to the Siddhantic size of the universe would be 580 years, which is quite adequate for the persons who lived at the junction of the Dvapara and Kali Yugas. Also, we can find connection. We just mentioned two approaches. First, proportionality approach, based on the, based on the ratio between Siddhantic and Puranic sizes of the universe, and the second approach, based on the relative perception of the size of the universe. So the ratio of Siddhantic and Puranic sizes of the universe can be expressed also as the lifespan of for the inhabitants of Makarloka to the lifespan of the inhabitants of a level who perceive the universe to be of Siddhantic size. It's found to be the same value, the same proportionality coefficient K. This is just to mention possible connection between these two proposed approaches. So this is a point for some maybe future research. It's would be interesting to find connection between height of the universe with the perceived size, of the universe, how the size of the universe is perceived depending on the height, on the Puranic height of the planet. This is one of the possible directions of future research. And of course, there may be some more complex dependencies, in particular this logarithmic dependence on the lifespan of the residents at a particular level, which was mentioned in one of the books by Bhaktisvarupa Damodara Goswami. So it may be the direction of future research to develop these approaches. So to make some preliminary conclusions, we proposed two proportionality approaches. The first takes into consideration the proportionality coefficient between the Puranic and Siddhantic sizes of the universe. And we estimated the modern distances to the stars mentioned in the Puranas, to the stars and lokas mentioned in the Puranas. And also the inverse proportionality approach, where it is supposed that the size of the universe is differently perceived at the different locus, and it's inversely proportional to the lifespan at a particular cosmic level. So I find appropriate to mention this verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita, which was also mentioned yesterday. Srimad Bhagavatam is as great as Krishna, the Supreme Lord, and shelter of everything. In each and every verse of Srimad Bhagavatam and in each and every syllable, there are various meanings. Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya, 24th chapter, verse 318. Recently, this research was published, was uploaded at the site of Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies, and the details of the presented approaches may be found in the paper. I thank you very much for your kind attention. My special thanks for all the organizers of the conference, to Mataji Prishni, Radha Mohan Prabhu, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, who encouraged my humble attempt to make some research in this field. Hare Krishna. Thank you.